So let's talk about a guy you might have heard of. Big personality, loves gold, has a very particular way with words. Yes, Donald J. Trump. Now, I know what you're thinking. When you hear Trump and peace in the same sentence, it feels a little like hearing healthy and deep-fried butter at the same time. It's confusing, right? But here's the thing. During his presidency, there was a surprising amount of talk about him being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Not once, but multiple times. It sounds wild, I know, but people were genuinely making the case. And look, whether you love him or you hate him, and let's be honest, there isn't a lot of middle ground with this guy, the conversation itself is fascinating. How did the man famous for fire and fury become a candidate for the world's most prestigious peace award? What did he actually do on the world stage that led to these nominations? We're going to dive into the deals, the handshakes, and the high-stakes diplomacy that put Trump in the running. We'll look at the agreements that were signed and the conflicts that were, at least for a moment, put on pause. So, buckle up. We're going to unpack the story behind the headlines, separating the political spin from the diplomatic substance. Was it all just a reality TV show on a global scale, or was there some genuine peacemaking happening? By the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture. And hey, while you're here, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button for Academic 51. We're trying to figure things out together, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Let's get into it. Alright, first stop, the Middle East, a region where peace agreements are about as common as a quiet day on Twitter. For decades, the standard thinking was that you couldn't have peace between Israel and the Arab world without first solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was like the ultimate political roadblock. Everyone from presidents to kings had tried and failed to get around it. It was considered the central unsolvable issue that held everything else hostage. You had to go through that door, or no doors would open. Then, in comes the Trump administration, and they basically looked at the map and said, what if we just build a new door? They decided to sidestep the main conflict and go directly to other Arab nations, specifically the ones who were quietly getting a little nervous about Iran's growing influence. It was a classic the enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, but on a massive geopolitical scale. They approached countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and pitched a new idea: normalize relations with Israel, form a united front against Iran, and unlock massive economic and technological benefits. And to the shock of many, it actually worked. The Abraham Accords were signed on the White House lawn, and suddenly, Israel had formal diplomatic ties with the UAE and Bahrain, with others like Sudan and Morocco following. For the first time in decades, we saw commercial flights between Tel Aviv and Dubai. We saw embassies opening up. It was a genuine diplomatic earthquake that redrew the political map of the region. It didn't solve the Palestinian issue, not by a long shot, but it proved that peace, or at least cooperation, was possible on other fronts. It was a massive, undeniable diplomatic achievement. Now, let's pivot from the Middle East to East Asia, and talk about a relationship that was less of a slow-burning diplomatic dance, and more of a will they or won't they start World War III reality show. I'm talking, of course, about Donald Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Before Trump, the relationship was tense. You had Kim testing missiles that could theoretically reach the United States, and American presidents responding with sanctions and stern warnings. It was a predictable and frankly terrifying cycle. Then Trump came along and decided to throw the entire playbook into a volcano. He started by calling Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man on Twitter, which, is not typically found in Diplomacy 101 textbooks. The insults flew back and forth, and for a minute there, it felt like we were all just one angry tweet away from nuclear winter. The tension was higher than it had been in years. It was a global staring contest, and nobody was blinking. The whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see who would make the next move. And then, in a twist nobody saw coming, Trump did the unthinkable. He agreed to meet Kim, face to face. An American president had never met with a North Korean leader before. He crossed the demilitarized zone, shaking Kim's hand in a moment of pure political theater that was broadcast around the globe. They held summits in Singapore and Hanoi. Now, did these meetings lead to North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons? No, let's be clear, that did not happen. But what did happen was a temporary de-escalation. The missile tests stopped, the fire and fury rhetoric cooled down, and the immediate threat of war receded. It was a pause button on a crisis, and for that moment, it felt like a monumental shift. Okay, let's fly over to Europe to a corner of the Balkans that's been a hotspot of ethnic and political tension for decades, Serbia and Kosovo. This is a conflict with deep, painful roots. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008, but Serbia has never recognized it. This isn't just a political disagreement, it's a source of constant hostility that has crippled the region's economy and prevented it from moving forward. For years, the international community tried to mediate, but the two sides were stuck in a bitter stalemate. The Trump administration looked at this long-running historical feud and decided to approach it not as a historian but as a real estate developer. They figured if they couldn't get the two sides to agree on history or sovereignty, maybe they could get them to agree on something else: money. The logic was simple. If we can connect these two economies, build roads, railways, and create jobs, maybe the political stuff will become less important over time. It was a classic business-first approach to a deeply emotional conflict. So, they brought the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo to the White House. Not for a grand peace treaty, but for what they called an economic normalization agreement. They signed deals to open up rail and highway links, to recognize each other's diplomas and professional certificates, and to cooperate on economic projects. It was less about redrawing borders and more about building bridges, literally and figuratively. It was a pragmatic, if unconventional step. It didn't solve the core political dispute, but it was the first significant agreement between the two sides in years, offering a glimmer of hope that economic self-interest could pave a new path toward stability. Alright, let's talk about a different kind of conflict, one that wasn't between nations but against a brutal non-state actor, ISIS. By the time Trump took office, the so-called Islamic State had carved out a massive territory across Syria and Iraq, a caliphate from which they launched terror attacks and committed horrific atrocities. The fight against them was already underway, led by a global coalition, but it was a slow, grinding war of attrition. ISIS was dug in, controlling major cities like Mosul and Raqqa. The Trump administration's approach was, to put it mildly, less patient. They essentially gave their military commanders more authority to act quickly and decisively on the ground. The message from the White House was clear: take the gloves off. This shift in strategy led to an intensified air campaign and greater support for local partner forces, primarily the Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria and the Iraqi security forces. The pace of the war accelerated dramatically. It was a brutal, destructive phase of the conflict, with a heavy toll on the cities they were trying to liberate. The result, however, was undeniable. Within about a year, the physical caliphate was systematically dismantled. Mosul fell. Raqqa, the de facto capital of ISIS, was liberated. By March 2019, the final pocket of ISIS-held territory in the village of Baghouz in Syria was captured. The black flag of ISIS no longer flew over any town or city. Now, this didn't mean ISIS, the ideology, disappeared. The group went underground and remains a threat. But the military defeat of the physical caliphate was a major victory, bringing a measure of stability back to the region and eliminating the base from which ISIS had planned its global terror operations. Finally, let's talk about the war that has spanned presidencies, cost trillions of dollars, and defined a generation of American foreign policy: Afghanistan. For nearly 2 decades, the United States was stuck. No president wanted to be the one who lost Afghanistan, so the troops stayed, the fighting continued, and a clear path to victory seemed impossible. It was America's forever war, a conflict with no end in sight, just an endless cycle of deployments and casualties. The Trump administration came in with a very different mandate, driven by Trump's America First promise to end these long-standing foreign entanglements. Their goal was simple: get U.S. troops out. To do that, they decided they needed to do something that was once considered unthinkable: negotiate directly with the Taliban. For years, the official U.S. policy was not to negotiate with the group they had gone there to fight, but the Trump team saw it as the only realistic path to an exit. These talks were long and complicated, held mostly in Doha, Qatar. They eventually led to a conditional peace agreement signed in February 2020 between the U.S. and the Taliban. Under the deal, the U.S. agreed to a phased withdrawal of all its troops. In exchange, the Taliban pledged to prevent groups like Al-Qaeda from using Afghan soil to attack the U.S. and to enter into peace talks with the Afghan government. This was a monumental and hugely controversial deal. It set a firm timeline for the U.S. withdrawal, effectively ending America's direct combat role and setting the stage, for better or worse, for the final chapter of the war. So, there you have it. The Abraham Accords, the North Korea summits, the Serbia-Kosovo economic deal, the defeat of the ISIS caliphate, and the beginning of the end of the war in Afghanistan. It's a pretty substantial list. When you lay it all out, you can see why the Nobel conversation even started. These were tangible actions that, in many cases, broke with decades of foreign policy doctrine and produced real, measurable results. He didn't just talk about doing things differently, he actually did them, for better or worse. But the question remains, was it Nobel-worthy? Well, that's the complicated part. Critics will point out correctly that these deals often left key issues unresolved. The Abraham Accords bypassed the Palestinians, the North Korea talks didn't lead to denuclearization, and the Afghanistan withdrawal was chaotic and tragic in its final execution. Was this true? Sustainable peace? Or was it a series of transactional deals that prioritized short-term wins over long-term stability? That's the debate, and honestly, there are valid arguments on both sides. Ultimately, history will be the final judge. What we can say for sure is that the Trump presidency forced a major reevaluation of how America engages with the world. It was a disruptive, unconventional, and often chaotic approach to diplomacy that produced some equally unconventional results. What do you think? Did these moves make the world a safer place? Let us know in the comments below. And please don't forget to subscribe to Academic 51 for more deep dives into the topics that shape our world. Thanks for watching.